We are basically talking about XR design. Again, like VR is kind of this whole new field, and nobody knows what the heck they're doing. Anyone who says they know what the heck they're doing is lying. It's not, the medium hasn't been out enough, right? And so coming to VR with a lot of baggage from previous mediums doesn't work, which leads you in the terrifying space of what the heck are we even doing, and sort of the process of figuring all that out. And why don't we all introduce ourselves? Why don't you go, Chris? Who are you? Chris, who are you?
Hello, I'm Chris Hanney from iLlusions. We made a game a couple of years ago, launched with the Vive, called Space Pirate Trainer. And we spent the last 3 years trying to make the next game and porting Space Pirate Trainer to all of the things, including the Quest, which came out last week, and we're super excited with that release. It's been an amazing whirlwind with the Quest. And just being able to play VR outside is amazing. But don't play Quest outside.
Don't play Quest outside.
As a disclaimer.
And that's actually a real thing.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. Yeah, you'll burn your lenses.
All right, I'm Trevor Blom. I'm from Vertigo Games, the tech lead. We made Arizona Sunshine, Skyworld, and recently Skyworld Brawl, and we're working on new stuff that I can't talk about yet, but it's going to be really awesome. And recently we've also been doing a lot of arcade stuff and LBVR, so we're diving into that market as well.
Cool. And I'm Sam Kennedy. I'm from Tigertron. We're based in New York. And we released our first VR game about a month ago called Jupiter and Mars.
Nice. And I'm Sai. You guys have seen way too much of my face today. But I was the studio director at Alchemy Labs. I'm in a super stealthy mode of starting a new startup with my co-founder, Alex Schwartz. What games did I come out with? I did Job Simulator and Rick and Morty Virtual Reality, and then recently Vacation Simulator came out from Alchemy Labs as well. So a lot of us are here from like early days. It's still really, really early days right now.
Still feels like it, yeah.
It really is. I wonder, like, especially with the Quest coming out, and it's now the first device that I can actually like encourage people to go get, even if they've never touched VR. I'm like, have we just had dev kits up till now? Like, I love the Vive. I love Quest with Touch, but is it a dev kit? Kind of?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, I will say one thing that I am very happy about is that, from the standpoint of having to demo VR and, go to trade shows and events and things like that, certainly having it untethered is a huge game changer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's also what you said about that we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
That's also because these headsets keep changing
much,
right? Like the Quest is totally different in designing.
Oh, yeah.
We have to start all over again just to design for this headset. And what comes next year? Are we going to start over again?
Oh,
right.
God.
Yeah.
Oh, God,
it's
again.
probably going to happen, right? So
I mean,
we can't even make best practices yet.
Right.
The hardware keeps changing.
Well, it was especially really interesting, and you guys probably had the same experience where when we were working before Vive launched, that we were actually getting like new updates to the headset. And like the first headset we had, if you touched it in the wrong spot, it would like shock you. But like we didn't know what the ending form factor was even going to look like. And so we're trying to make a game for a device that we doesn't know like how heavy it's going to be, like what the controller shape is going to, like where the butt, like it was really interesting. What the specs were going to be, it was pretty intense.
Well, it definitely keeps it fun.
Yeah.
It does.
We had the 3D printed one as
Oh my
well,
God,
and if you put it in the wrong USB slot, it wouldn't work, and you have to restart the PC in a different USB slot and hope it works, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Every startup, you have to do it again.
Yeah, and there was a different, like I have special prayers, I say, depending on the day of the week, that when I'm trying to update all my drivers and try and get the Vive to work. But let's like kind of talk about making content itself. So like prototyping being the very beginning spot. Like, do you have a process that works for you that helps you find the fun, right? Because again, like you're making content for this brand new medium. There's this whole sense of presence that you have to deal with in design now. And so like again, like you could just put a game in a headset. Do you start there, or do you start from somewhere else?
I think a lot of us started there to just think, let's take one of these popular normal games and put it in VR and see what happens, and it's all shit, right? I think we've all been through that experience.
Yep.
Yeah. So what we found works best is just try it out. Just do a lot of prototyping, give everyone in the office a chance to try their ideas, because what seems like a bad idea might actually be the one you're looking for, right? Nobody knows what will happen.
I totally would agree. I mean, unlike more traditional games, it's easy to have these parallels like, oh, that works in that game, let's put that in ours. With VR, it was very different, especially when you're trying to build an overall experience, and you have to see what works. Pretty much every little aspect of the game we had to prototype. Kind of do, our level designer would do kind of gray box versions, and then we'd have everybody come by and check it out and see, does that feel fun? Does that feel like it's part of the experience? And then, and then we'd actually code it into the game and whatnot. But yeah, every little aspect we had to kind of prototype.
Yeah.
Our last 3 years has been prototyping.
You still prototyping?
Yeah. So Space Pirate Trainer is what you've seen. Some of you've played it. Is a prototype in us wanting to experiment with movement in space.
Yeah.
And we've been spending the last 2 years working on that. Like, we haven't publicly released anything of that work, but prototyping is super important in XR design.
For us, it's actually prototyping was how Job Simulator even came about. It was when we got the Vive, it shipped with an empty Unity scene. Like, there was nothing. There wasn't even like any content to try. Nothing existed. It's just a bunch of middle fingers and good luck, and that was basically all we had. So we honestly had no idea what to do. We didn't even have a concept when we started designing Job Simulator. We did basically we made a table. This is the story of the origin of Job Simulator. We're like, oh heck, what do we do? Well, let's just make a table and like put 3 blocks on it. And then like we went in there and we're like, okay, cool, we made 3 blocks, we got this working. Like, we were just trying to get the hands to work, like just see what that feels like. And it turned out that like physics was really fun. Like, we ended up sitting on the ground for like 40 minutes just like stacking these 3 boxes and then like hitting them in different patterns. We're like, oh my God, stuff's fun. Let's make more stuff. Like, more stuff to like stack and like knock over and stuff. And then it turned into what place has a lot of stuff? Well, I know Kitchen has tons of stuff. But that was how the whole game like came about. It was literally just through the process of prototyping.
And these stories are all over. Like, Tilt Brush came out of a chess game.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So like the 2
on a
guys
Wacom tablet.
Yeah.
Or like
they
on
were
a
making this
Cintiq.
chess thing, and they wanted to draw out the moves for the next play session.
Yeah.
And went, hold on, drawing is way more fun than chess.
It's fascinating.
It's one of the best applications in VR. On the Quest, I'm going to be plugging the Quest a lot today.
Yeah.
It's
happen.
amazing. You can just
Welcome
draw everywhere.
to the Quest.
And that's from a chess game.
Yeah. Well, you know why it's called Tilt Brush? The reason why it's called Tilt Brush is because they used to draw, like, it was before they had hand controls. They were doing it on an Oculus DK1, and so there were no hand interactions yet. So they were using a Wacom, and the way they had it is when you tilted the Wacom, right, it would tilt your view, so you could like draw on different. So you would draw here and here, but you draw here and it draw on a flat plane, and so it was called Tilt Brush because you would tilt the But then the name stuck. They're like, there's no reason to have tilting anymore, but. It's just such a good name.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
The first prototype for Arizona was actually on the back of a truck, where the truck would drive through a city, and you would basically hit zombies trying to get on your truck.
Yeah.
But it started being like a poking game, where you would keep poking down on all these zombies, and you would lose tracking constantly.
Right.
But we thought like, no, you can't really move in VR. You have this small space for tracking, so this is it, right? We're gonna design something in this space. We went for the truck. And then the prototypes came for, all right, maybe we need to do some form of locomotion, try out teleporting, see if we can make the world bigger, make you actually walk through the experience. And that's what it's been for a long while. We actually had a spot-based version of the game for a long time. And then near the end of when we were getting towards launch, we were getting this more like scenes where you would actually walk through. And then right before we launched, Onward came, which had the free locomotion. And so many people on Reddit and just online were asking for that, and it was the hype at that point. So we put that in as well. We tried prototyping with that. People got obviously super ill for that, but we put it in because some people wanted it anyway. And we sort of had to remake the game from scratch back then as well, because when you would teleport, like all the geometry would pop, and we did a fade, so we could do like quick loading and have a lag spike there, and they just cheat everything, right? And then you had free locomotion through the same scene at some point. Oh shit! No, we have to fix the performance for the full experience. So.
Yeah. So how big are your teams, and do you all prototype? Or I guess it's probably easier on smaller teams, but as we grew, we had to figure out the prototyping and who prototyped and how and why, like especially as teams get bigger.
Yeah, I mean, well, for us, yeah, I think in the prototyping, we had just a couple people who were, I mean, people would come by and check it out as we were testing certain things, but we had to kind of, just for budget reasons and whatnot, and we had to kind of keep things small at the, in the early days of the actual prototyping. So I don't know about you guys as well, but
Yeah, when we have some time, which is very scarce, we don't really do game jams. We do more like mechanic jams, where somebody can pick a mechanic, and that's just what you're gonna go for and see how it ends up with. And then these teams start to form around a mechanic, and then we'll see eventually if that can come into a game, right?
Well, and that makes so much sense since VR is such like an active, like physical, like it is that interaction method, right? All of VR is basically the interaction method, and then the story kind of later in a lot of ways. Like it has to fit the interaction method. So it makes sense that you would focus on mechanics and be like, what mechanic is good? Jam on that. Find something nice.
yeah, actually, I mean, that raises a good point. I think in retrospect, or sort of if we had, knowing what we know now, I actually would have recommended we do more of that, to be honest, because our approach definitely was a heavy story-driven game. It's an underwater adventure game, and we had some general philosophies about what would work well in VR. I mean, what we wanted to show off was the kind of the scale of environments, swimming through a submerged New York City or London. We knew that could be really great in VR and powerful in VR, but in retrospect, I wish we actually worked on some of the mechanics a little earlier as well. We basically started with our narrative and overall kind of environments and whatnot.
It's an interesting problem, right? Because if you want to tell a story, VR should definitely be a medium in which you can tell a story.
Yeah.
But because VR is so such a medium of agency, right? Like we have to figure out a whole new way of making narrative games in XR that I think we're still trying to figure out. One of the many things we don't know yet.
Yeah, maybe just to even add to that too. I mean, for us, kind of our creative director and art director had a vision for sort of how we would do cinematics in the game, and we had to throw all of that out. They even had animatics that they put together before we actually programmed a lot of the kind of cutscenes and whatnot in the game, and all of that had to be kind of rethought because you can't do dramatic camera angles and motion and any of that. So. Yeah.
We actually yesterday we had a discussion at the office. What do cinematics in VR mean?
Right.
What is it?
Nobody even knows.
Like, you can't even do a normal cinematic because you can look around, right?
Right.
So do we just want to play animations, or do we actually want interactions with the content? What is a VR cinematic? We still don't know.
It's kind of amazing. I ended up talking to the 360 video people way back in ye olde day, and they had a lot of hard time giving up the auteur eye, right? Like I want this is the experience I want somebody to have. So I want them looking here at this time. But because it's such a medium of agency, you can't just turn someone's head. They're gonna get incredibly nauseous, right? And so then you get people talking. There are no best practices, right? But people kind of whisper about things that might work. They're like, oh, well, I used vignetting, and I darkened everything to sort of bring their attention over here. Or I heard about an experience recently that basically if you weren't looking at the scene where people were talking, it would just sort of pause. They would just sort of murmur or sit on a bench and look at the make some quips about oh, the birds are real pretty, or weather's nice, or something. But they basically would stop the interaction while you weren't looking at them, and then you would turn back and
But that can also affect pacing. That can affect the importance of the next line of dialogue.
Absolutely.
There are so many problems here that are really hard to solve.
They're really hard
some
to
of the
solve.
greatest teams are working on this and still finding it hard. Here I go with my Quest plug again. The Vader Immortal thing, the Star Wars that came out last week, is spectacular in how it does narration. But it's still, you feel like you're watching it, not in it. And that's because it's really hard to give the player agency in a scripted scene. So when there's something happening and these people are waiting for you to interact with them, there's only so many points of interaction that can actually work, and that makes it really, really hard.
Yeah. We had this stuff going on with when we were doing Rick and Morty, which was our narrative game, right? With the voice stylings of Justin Roiland, and basically it was just we had to account for player agency. So if Rick tells you to do a task, right? And I don't know if anybody here has seen Rick and Morty, but or Justin Roiland in his comedy, but he tends to rant. He's a ranter. That's kind of what his whole comedy's about. So he goes on these rants, and meanwhile you're doing the task. They told you, you're like, okay, I get it. You want me to do this thing. So you start doing the thing. If you finish before he's done speaking, we had to have a method by which he would stop speaking and be like, all right, you did, like, to interrupt himself, to like react to what the player was doing. It was so incredibly complicated.
Yeah, no, I guess I would just say, like, I mean, maybe it's obvious from what we're saying, but for anyone who's embarking on creating VR content, just budget in extra time for this iteration around things like that.
Absolutely. Well, and I came from games background, right? And so, of course, like there's a whole lot of understanding of best practices about what you do in games. Like all of those have just like crumbled and fallen apart. Like I'm like, thanks, 15 years in the game industry, you've helped me with nothing. Like, how dare you?
We scaled up a lot in the last year. And you guys might have the same experience, but a lot of people that come into VR development, like if your team scales up, are also from non-VR, right? So we have a lot of these new designers writing up their game design document for the new game.
Do you have game design documents?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
But there was a discussion about that because they wrote it up, and then the devs that had VR experience were like, this is never going to work.
Yeah.
We've tried this before.
Exactly.
It's just not going to work. So we actually changed the whole way of working, where the game designers now write their intention for a feature and more say like, yeah, we want teleporting, and it sort of works like this, and sort of that from that game, and that from that game. And then we just start prototyping on their intention.
Yeah.
So our design document is not this 200-page Bible anymore. It's more like 20 pages of intentions.
I really like that. I think, making it about intentions is a good approach for VR. That's what we'll use in our next game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other thing is that and I've seen teams not do this, but every single member of our team had a headset at their desk so that they could be in and out constantly, so they could actually feel the changes that they were putting in. I knew a lot of people who would just like, I've seen models of offices. It sounds weird to be thinking about like office design in terms of best practice for VR development, but we're really calling everything into question. Like, I've been to a couple offices where they have the VR room, and it's like in an office room, like over to the side. Then they all work on their desks, and then when they want to go test something, they like get up and they load up the build and they go test in the VR room, but it's too far away, and so they only do it occasionally as opposed to just getting in and out all the time. Like, I can't believe we're redefining office space for VR. Like, this is dumb.
It's actually mandatory at our office too. Before you push your changes, you have to test it in VR.
Yep.
There's just no way not to do that anymore.
I think that's a really good approach, and I would almost say extend it to anyone on the team. I mean, like you were saying, anyone on the team, artists, designers, whatnot. Because I think one thing we discovered along the way too is like scale in VR is hard to get right sometimes.
Yes.
And, so you'd have an artist do something, and and just kind of, I'm done, with my work, and then a week or two later, it's like, oh no, that doesn't feel right. I would absolutely recommend, have them right on the spot figure out, does that make sense? Does that feel right?
What have you found with scale, like in terms of your findings with dealing just with object scale?
It's just everything. I mean, you have to test it in VR. You have to feel it. Does it feel right? Some things just feel, too claustrophobic if you have a room, or other things are just, you feel like they're too big and it takes too long to get across from one area to the next. It's just trial and error, really.
Complex items seem to always feel really small for me, and then I have to scale them up, and then larger, less complex objects feel really big. I don't know why that happens. In Job Simulator, we had the microwave. It ended up being this like massive. It had to be this massive thing.
Yeah.
Way larger than my actual microwave. Or is it? God, now I don't even know. I don't even know the real scale of real objects anymore.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've looked at a real microwave too.
Yeah. Well, the blender in
the
Job
blender
Simulator
was
like
pretty
this
big.
massive object, but it didn't make sense smaller. Like, it just felt tiny somehow.
Yeah.
Even when it looked realistic. We found this a lot in Job Simulator, that trying to make things look realistic, right, and trying to make them work like they actually work, like, just doesn't translate well at all. Like, you almost have to appeal to human beings, like how they think something should work, as opposed to how they know they've seen it. So like the blender's a really good example. Like, people blenders, and they have these little buttons that they press for different speeds. That like barely translated at all in VR. But having this big freaking dumb lever, everyone was just like, I know exactly. I got this. I figured it out. So, but like,
I think it's a really good point.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah, that's why our game doesn't have anything realistic at all. It's
Nothing?
all flying robots and lasers.
I find that incredibly realistic. I've seen a laser.
You're right.
Yeah.
Have you seen flying robots?
I mean drones are sort of.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I was starting to see them.
And
Maybe-
our game simulates that pretty good, right?
It does. It's
Yeah.
pretty good. I mean, I think you're predicting the future is what
Yeah,
you're doing.
this is what we're going for.
Yeah.
This is Space 2060, 2065, yeah.
Yeah, it's got it.
Yeah.
We're getting it. We're getting it.
I think the hardest object based on skill are hands in VR.
Yes.
I think we made like 10 hand rigs, and we have this animator who also made our hands, who has really small fingers. He has really tiny fingers.
Yeah.
So when he made one of these hands, and we put it into VR, he was like, yeah, there are new hands in VR. And we tested it like, dude, you made your own hands.
You made your own hands.
Feels so weird for everyone else.
I think the first hands we had were the default, like you can just get them from the Unity store, but they're veiny. Have you seen these weird veiny hands? They're bad. They're very bad. But that's kind of why we went with the big oversized gloves. It was almost, if you didn't try and look like anyone's hand, like if you jokingly, obviously, without a shadow of doubt, didn't even try to look like real hands, everyone could like identify with them. They're like, oh, they're big gloved Mickey Mouse hands, whatever. Like I identify with that. I recognize that as mine. But the minute you try and like make it like look like a real hand, people are like, that's not my hand. I know what my hand looks like. This isn't it. Get rid of it.
And that extends to entire body.
Yeah.
So any form of presence of a player in VR can immediately be rejected by a lot of people.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons, I'm now a woman in this game, or I'm a man in this game, and I don't identify with this shell that they've given me. So a hand is a really intricate thing, because this is the object you interact with the virtual space.
Right.
And we know about them. I've had two most of my life, and I look at them all the time, and I pick up stuff.
Yeah.
So I have a very emotional attachment to this hand.
Yeah.
And that extends, I guess, to your arms.
Yeah.
Which is why I find a lot of our game doesn't have hands.
Mm-hmm.
We've played with it, but it just didn't feel right.
Right.
Likewise, it doesn't have arms.
Right.
Does Arizona have arms?
Not for yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I've seen when the hands extend kind of down the wrist
Yeah.
a little bit. If it's not in the right rotation, I'm like, get it off.
Yeah.
Like it almost, you get that body horror sensation of. Yeah.
Like there's some titles, I think the Servius Raw Data. What do we say in this country? Data.
Raw data.
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 Raw data?
I mean, it's fine. Words.
I'm from Australia. I don't know how to pronounce anything. They have the phantom arm that stops here.
Yeah.
And that did originally make me feel quite queasy, of all things.
We had it in Job Simulator because you grab. That's what Job Simulator is about, grabbing. Like fundamentally, that is what the game's about. But like trying to figure out like how you grab things is different. Like if you grab a ball, you're going to grab it like this. But like if you grab a cup, it's going to be like this. Unless it's a mug, in which case you grab it like this. You know, like that you grab things in different ways. And so trying to model the hand to like like there was no, so we started just making the hand disappear. So we do tomato presence, which is when you grab, say, a tomato and your hand disappears, and basically the tomato becomes sort of, and that's what you want to look at anyway. But it's sort of understanding like like what humans want, like what are they expecting? Because I didn't realize that you could like remove a hand and humans weren't going to be bothered by it, but they had no problem.
Yeah, our hands are two
Totally
pistols.
gone. Yeah.
And most people are okay with that. They have the pistol, like, oh yeah, that's my hand. I'll zap.
Yeah.
I forgot that you coined tomato presents. That's you guys, right?
Yeah, that's us. Alex, I think.
Alex?
Alex, is that an
Yeah.
Alex Schwartz original?
Yeah, try to
Keep it going?
Nice.
Yeah, got it. Got it. Edible UI is mine.
Edible UI.
Yeah. So Exit Burrito was all of ours, but I'm trying to turn Edible UI where you eat your selections, like your menu selections. I think that's the future. I think that's a best practice.
There you go.
There you go. We found
Chalk that one up on the list.
best
Number one,
practice in VR, Edible UI.
eat your UI.
So what about like when you're first like, you're like, I'm gonna make a game. I'm gonna make a VR game. How do you approach the design ideas? Like we talked about prototyping, but almost before then, like, are you thinking more about, especially in this era, like we've touched, there's a whole panel about the VR winter, or basically the hype cycle, or even all of that. But like, do you think about what the market might want? Like, do you think about what you want to see in VR more? I think it really depends.
Yeah, we are definitely what do we want to see?
What do you want to see in the world?
We're a small team, so we're 3 people.
Right.
We range between 3 and 6. But we made Space Pirate Trainer, especially Dirk made Space Pirate Trainer because he wanted to see what can I do in a small space? What can I do in a large space? This is fun. I'm running around and I'm shooting things and it's fun. And that's kind of what drives us is what do we want to play? What doesn't exist yet? Let's do something cool and new. And that's possible for a small team, I guess. I like to hear from larger teams because we are small, so we can afford to make curious experiments
Right.
every day. But yeah.
Yeah, our target is now actually to get a lot of people in VR and into our game. So we sort of designed for that as well. Two obvious things are multiplayer and multi-platform. So get all the platforms running in parity, the same content, the same networking and whatnot. But in the end, we still just want to make full-fledged games, and we make those games around a mechanic. So we have those mechanic jams, we pick the ones that really work well, and that's the base of the game. And then we want this game to be for everyone, right? But that's afterwards. And that's the marketing flavor, I guess, and the business sense. But in the core, it's still just the game we want to play in VR.
Yeah, I would agree too. I mean, for us, it was also what's the game that we want to not even just play, but experience in VR. You know, we wanted to create. We started really with that overall experience that we wanted to have and the story we wanted to tell, and then we, you know, we had some ideas about what kind of mechanics would work well, and you know, some of them panned out and some of them didn't. But really, it was we started with the overall experience.
It's so for us, it's definitely the same. It was like, what do we need to see in VR? And even more than that, it was almost like, what needs to exist in VR?
Yeah,
like, I am going to control this market and put out content that should exist. Like, it almost turns into that sort of thing. Like, people need to see how the magic of VR, right? So let's like lean in really hard to that. It got a little bit interesting with Rick and Morty because there is a massive fan base for Rick and Morty, and there's like a whole bunch of lore and things that they want to see. So like we knew there were certain objects from the game we had to put in, right? And it was almost, and we would have conversations of, oh, if I were in a mad scientist's garage, like what would I want to do, right? And we had those discussions, but we also had discussions of, well, I mean, obviously Rick has to yell at you, and we have to work that in, right? Obviously, we have to have this really iconic object from the game, from the show in the game. So it was like a little bit of both in a major way. But I think a lot of it is still like as we're trying to figure out things, it does need to be sort of. I mean, we are the people, right? Like, VR sells itself to me, obviously. I mean, I think that happened to all of us. We tried VR and we're like, well, this is our life now.
Exactly.
We're also always looking for something that can only be done in VR. There's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of game stuff you can put in VR and it's going to be fine. But it's not the essence of VR, right? So the simple one is shooting. Shooting in VR is always different than you'll ever do on a 2D screen. But then we also had this question with Skyworld, which is it's a strategy game which would do fine on 2D, but what makes it awesome in VR, right? So that's when we were looking at all those VR interactions, and you can poke your characters and rotate the table, and it's something you cannot do when you're not in VR. So we're always looking for something like that as well and put it in the game.
It's you know, I think it actually goes through phases too, like especially in the early creation. Like it's like, oh, what do I want to see? But then for us, we start testing almost immediately. We start testing with outside people who are not developers, who are not us. Almost as soon as we have like anything that doesn't crash instantly. Like we've put people in with like primitives and like bad art and temporary programmer art and all sorts of stuff just because we need to get those interaction methods. Do you guys do the testing thing? How early?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, as early as possible
Yeah.
with VR, and the broadest kind of audience you can possibly get. By all means, I mean, it's so important for VR.
Stuff just crashes into launch day for us. So
Yeah,
we
no,
never
I mean,
have
fair
time.
enough.
It's always
Yeah,
on fire until the minute before launch.
I've apologized to human beings for letting them test in certain builds. Like they've come in like, I'm so sorry, today's not a good day, but you're gonna put your face in it, so go on.
But that's a hard one as well, right? Because if you're not running on frame rate,
Oh, no,
you're
no,
actually
frame
going to
rates,
make these
yeah.
people sick, and they say it's a bad experience,
I
even
totally
though
agree.
the mechanics might be really cool, right?
Yeah.
That's always something we keep struggling with in VR because it always has to be in frame rate.
Yep.
Even if you're an editor and everything is running diagnostics and whatever, you still don't want it to run on 10 frames.
Yep.
It's something you're battling constantly.
I'd feel comfortable putting frame rate on the best practices, 90 frames per second. Have to. But that's the first thing that we do is make sure that it runs at frame rate, because otherwise the experience gets totally tainted just by the fact that they can't even operate without getting horribly nauseous. Yeah. But go on.
I was just
You
going to
have
say, so yeah, you have a target frame rate, but I mean, along the way, do you encounter times where you're, you know, running too much on screen and whatnot, and that's dipping, and then, I mean, do you keep it kind of optimized as you're going through the whole development process, and just,
As much as possible. So because once I'm testing, once I'm having people testing, like I will have people come in once a week.
Yeah.
And then as we start ramping up, then it becomes more people per week. But like at those times before the tester, like it must be optimized by that time. And if it if it starts losing frame rate, we're like, okay, that is like a huge issue, fix immediately.
I think this is one of the design decisions we've made in the last 3 years, I guess. We launched as a Vive launch title. So we're aiming for a specific spec, the 970, I think it was at the time. It was a relatively expensive video card. But in the last 3 years, we've sort of flipped that, and now we're targeting min spec, like min spec, beyond min spec. Like if it runs on a Surface Pro, it's good for us.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Like if we're targeting Intel like inbuilt stuff, like the Intel 620 it is. You can buy it for cents and put it into your laptop. It doesn't cost anything. It's integrated. And so that's our target, and it has been for ages.
Oh, yeah.
And it still is. Like we still target the Intel 620.
Oh, yeah.
Just because it makes things like this, targeting frame rate, always important. And so from there we can then build up to the higher end stuff, but you know it's going to run.
Right. No, we did the same thing at Alchemy. We had at least one developer at all times, God bless him, who volunteered to have the trash machine that was literally like, what do we have like in a drawer, and just like cobble it together. It was below min spec in many ways, and then we upgraded it to like at min spec, right?
Yeah.
But like he developed on that machine.
Yeah, I develop on a Dell XPS. It's one of my
God
machines.
bless you. God,
It's one of my machines is
you're
Dell
doing
XPS.
God's work. Like this is important because that's how you catch this stuff early.
Absolutely.
Right? Of course we're devs. We want like the highest end computer that does
I
everything.
mean, I have that
ever.
next to me. Like I have this crazy machine that has all the bells and whistles and
Do you
lights
look
in
at it longingly? Do you just reach for it? Just
I have it on. It's always on.
it's there for you.
It's on,
Yeah.
humming with my Vive plugged into it, so it's fine. But I will go back to my Windows Mixed Reality headset on my
Yeah.
Dell on a daily basis.
And that's honestly how we catch the majority of our stuff, is like actually working in those
Yeah.
environments.
I think that's a best practice then too,
Ooh.
yeah.
We have 3. I thought there were
We came into
none.
this saying that it was impossible to have anything on this list, and we're already agreeing on 3.
I know.
We have 3. 3 things. What's the best teleportation mode? No, I don't want to get into that argument. I don't want to get in that argument. I only get in that argument on Twitter. I never in person. That's how you lose friendships.
Yeah.
Yeah, but with the testing thing, sorry, just kind of spinning back, talk about like, do I make stuff for myself or do I make things for other people? I find myself making stuff for other people once I get to the testing stage, only because like they start doing something like, oh, I'm going to reach for this glass, and then the glass doesn't work, and they go, "Ugh." And I'm like, oh no, they're disappointed. I have to fix it. I can't disappoint anyone. Like I need them to be happy and satisfied.
Yeah, I 100% agree with. Like, so we also, when it came to your locomotion, your movement, and we had I had some personal preferences for our game, and whenever we had a lot of people testing it, and I realized that it was. By all means, we had to build in other modes for them. The enjoyment of the game was so critical to their enjoyment of the game. It was just really fascinating to me along the way that we had our ideas, we had different team members who had their preferences, but ultimately we had to like serve the entire audience that were playing it because it was so critical to their enjoyment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we found weird things with testing. Like I saw this one person, we were doing the automotive job in Job Simulator, and this person wanted to fill the entirety of the car with donuts. It was very important to them that they fill the entirety of the car with donuts and then send it on their way. And this was in early days, and like when it went to drive away, like all the donuts just fell out. And I have never seen anybody more like they fell to the ground and were like cursing the skies that this car didn't take off with all their donuts. I was like, I never knew that I needed to worry about this, about what the car does after it leaves, but it's important. It's important to somebody.
What we have at the office is that what you said about the glass is that somebody tested that it was not interactable.
Yeah.
We think that if something is interactable, everything has to be interactable. So
Everything.
at some point, you just open the box of Pandora, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I picked this up and I can break it. I
Yeah.
can do that with everything now,
Yeah.
right? That's what
Yeah.
people think. So it has to work like that.
Absolutely.
And how we get to the point is that at moments in our development, we say to the team, just play the game and pick something you are that you really want to improve about the game and just make it better. And then people start picking this stuff up because they're like, oh, I could do this, but I could not do that, what I expected. And everyone is just making their own, mostly interactions, because they just want to make the world more acceptable in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Rather than having some stuff that is not interactable.
And that adds so much depth. Like, then the world gets really deep. Then people stop, like, trying to figure out, like, oh, this is a game. They're like, oh my god, it's a world. Like, I don't even know what's happening.
I'd rather have some objects not in the game if they're not interactable than
Right.
have them in the game, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. We've cut things from the game because they couldn't interact the way we wanted them to. So, like, if you notice in Job Simulator Kitchen, there's no knife. Who doesn't have a knife in a kitchen? Job Simulator, because we couldn't make it work. Because people take a knife and then they immediately start like hitting things, and we couldn't make all the individual cuts every time people tried to. So then we tried all sorts of methods to try and get the knife work, like to joke our way out of it. Like we're like, oh, it shatters when you cut, and we're like, that's incredibly unsatisfying. Yeah.
That's why there's no melee in Arizona.
There's
We couldn't get that right. We actually
get
have
it right?
prototypes of melee.
Wow.
But we couldn't get it right, so we took it out.
Do you guys have other like spectacular failures, like things that just you thought would be really really cool and just failed horribly?
Well,
I'm not talking about our failures.
I want to hear it.
We just
Tell
have
me.
success.
Tell me. No. We'll talk about success next. I want to hear the failures.
Well, we've done a lot of prototypes.
Yeah.
And on the melee topic, like we introduced, I don't know, about a year into open access, early access, a melee weapon, which we're still super proud of. But most people don't even know where it is or how to find it. So accessibility and discoverability in VR is quite hard, and we've been challenging with that. So I'd say it's not quite a failure, but trying to educate a player on everything they can do without being too hands-on-y is quite difficult.
Tutorializing.
And so I'd say some of the hardest things we've done is trying to tell a player where things are without being too dramatic about it. Like one of the mechanics we have is a shield is on your back. And to get your shield, you just put your hand there, and now it's a shield. Trying to educate that to a player is so hard. And also just the construct of movement. So players, when they first play our game, didn't want to move. They're not used to moving, so they just sit there holding their controller like this, and there's droids shooting at them, and we want you to move. So the first versions of the game, I'd say 90% of people just got shot 3 times, and it was game over, and they didn't enjoy it. Trying to get them to actually just do this was one of the hardest design things we ever had. And that might sound weird, but it really was hard.
No, it totally is. My whole demo procedure is based on getting people to move before they get in the game, so they feel safe moving once they're in the game.
Yeah.
It's totally a problem.
So it's one of the things we spent most of our time getting that right, and that probably took us a year. And we're quite happy with it now, but it's still complicated because new players, like we've just, here we go with my Quest blog, just launched a demo for the Quest, and the whole basis of the first 30, 40 seconds of that demo is waiting for that player to move. And we have this little voice saying, step over here, dodge.
Yeah.
And most players get it now, but you still have to handhold them through the basic interaction of movement and dodging.
I did once have somebody, when in a Job Simulator demo, ask us, what button do I press to crouch?
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, you just crouch? You've got your legs. Your legs, your head, you just duck. Like, do the thing. And it is. It's like kind of almost unintuitive that you can intuitively use your body exactly the way you think.
Were you worried about the fact that, like, when you demo, you're there to give advice like that, but the fact that when you put it out in the wild, you're not there to coach players?
Oh yeah, I wish I shipped in the box of
I know.
of every single experience. I would
That's
do it happily.
That's how we felt as well. I mean, and then actually, to your point too, we had to spend a lot more time on our tutorial than we ever anticipated. I mean, it was months of just. And and that was a whole segment of the game that we just didn't really plan for. We thought it would be intuitive enough, but it like again, being at enough demos and doing demo sessions and realizing people weren't getting certain fundamental things to the game, it caused us to have to like really handhold people or hold their hands at the beginning.
Yeah, can we even call it failing in VR?
I mean,
we work for VR, like I think we're all going through this process of making stuff that just doesn't work.
Oh no, I love it.
It's not even failing anymore, I think.
Yeah. I mean, well, one thing, that it seems maybe obvious in retrospect, but we had a mechanic where, because you play as dolphins in the game, and you could go through air bubble rings to like get a temporary speed boost, like in Sonic the Hedgehog. That didn't work.
No.
I mean, instant nausea.
Yeah, it just happens. I actually love failing because I learn so much from trying something that doesn't work. And I love sharing it because, first of all, the stories often end up hilarious and the GIFs are choice on Twitter. But also, like, I get to share that, like, I I know a lot about VR, right? And then I try something and it fails horribly. I assume other people will also get there. Because I'm smart, but I'm not that smart. And someone else is going to think that can be like, no, I can save you time. Don't do that. Don't do that thing. So yeah, it's interesting. Like for failures, like we always put a conveyor belt in the game. Oh, like every game I think Alchemy has ever done, there's a conveyor belt in it. Because we think like, how do we get people more stuff? Oh, we'll just have a conveyor belt that brings stuff. It feels awful. And every single time we do a game, at some point someone says like, oh, but what if we use a conveyor belt though? Every single time. And we've gone through this process multiple times. But you can't say no to it. You have to do it again. Because maybe this time no, it didn't work. No, it won't. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all.
We actually had the item slot here as well,
Right.
with the shotgun. I think everyone tried that who has weapons. Maybe we can put a weapon here, and then nobody knows how to use it. Yeah.
I love the tutorial process. So Job Simulator had a tutorial, barely, but I mean, it was because the whole mechanic is grabbing, so you basically just have to teach people how to grab. So in the very beginning of Job Simulator, JobBot, your tour guide, gives you a card, and invariably, like everyone grabs it, and then they immediately drop it because they think of the trigger as like a toggle, not as a grab. So they grab it, and then it falls, and then they reach down, and then they grab it and they hold it, and I'm like, cool, now you know what to do in the game. But like it took us a while to get that, to figure out something seamless like that. Because I don't ship in the box. God, I wish we did. I want to give everyone a great VR experience.
So why don't you ship with the box?
And there's just one of me, and apparently Quest is really popular, and like...
I'm sorry about that.
How's cloning technology going?
That's not our department.
And then I have to educate myself to show us all the best way to do this. So but let's talk about things that worked out really well, like things that you didn't expect would work well, and you're like, oh my God, this is everything.
So before I was saying how hard it is to convey to a general player to play the game, what did really work is how quickly kids got the game. Yes. So when I say players just sit there staring at this in front of them, that's generally people 20 and above.
Grown.
But you put
adults.
like a 12-year-old in Space Pirate Trainer, they get it. They get it. They're in a different universe now. They're going to run around like crazy. And that didn't require me to be shipped in a box to tell them they don't care where the shield is. They just want to zap stuff. So they usually will find the shield. They usually will definitely play until they're pulled out of the device. And I've seen that with Job Simulator too. Like, kids get it. They know how to pick things up, and they know how to make soup, and they can't wait to make more.
Are adults, as us non-youths, are we like too old that we've confused ourselves? Like
Maybe.
what happened? Like we have too many things in our heads. We have too many.
Yeah, we're too busy for this stuff.
Are we snide? Do we think the game's gonna try and do a bamboozle and trick us?
Yeah, probably.
Like, what is it?
I
Kids are
just think we're
great
so
at it.
used to our actual reality that we just don't expect it to behave differently. And so kids are more experimental with, oh, here's a new toy. I'm going to play with it for the next 6 hours. And they'll do that in virtual reality. They'll just do it.
They're still trying to figure out the world.
Yeah.
And so when they're in a virtual reality world, they're like, let me figure
Okay, this
this
is real.
out.
I'm in.
Whereas we have all these preconceived notions and
exactly.
expectations. Wow.
Well, well, maybe one thing was that we had maybe a little happy accident in terms of, for us, we actually had to work backwards, in terms of optimizing frame rate towards the end and whatnot. And one of the things that in our game, we had these sort of sparkle trails that would kind of help guide the player where to go. And one thing in that frame rate optimization phase, one of the programmers actually had to cut the draw distance of the sparkle trail, to only a couple feet, so that we could, he was just optimizing. And I saw that, and it turned out to be very magical the way it would actually light up right in front of your path as you were swimming. And I was like, that's amazing, keep it, and then apply it to all the levels. So now it's a cool, nifty feature in the game, but it just happened to be because we were trying to optimize frame rate. Yeah.
I think that the best achievement you can get in terms of, it's not really happy accidents for us, but getting people into the game and they get it right away and they know what to do. I think that's one of the biggest compliments you can get, right? Yes. So for shooting, that's super easy. People understand guns, even if they've never shot one. The control already feels sort of like a gun, I guess. It has a trigger, right? But then other tutorials, such as movement, are pretty hard to convey in text and in images. But what we felt really works almost every time is just show the controller they're holding and show the button they should press in VR, and then it ticks right away. So our first iterations were these like full screen images showing the controller with an arrow where to press it. But since they don't see the controller, they don't know what they're doing. But actually just showing the controller on their hand fixes that right away.
Yeah, we had the problem in Job Simulator because to get to the menu is the only button we have besides the trigger, and we had JobBot basically show it on us because he's a computer, he's a floating computer. So like he just turned his face into like hit this button right here, and it shows whatever controller you have, and then within like basically the button that you want. But like yeah, it's definitely is it the big like on the Vive, like is it the big flat button? No, it's the little one right beneath it. Like it does get really nuanced.
That's actually really hard when you're doing demos.
Oh yeah.
And they're like, how do I reload? How do I reload? Yeah, press the big button on your thumb, but I don't know what to do.
One day.
Could you talk a little about use of sound to augment the experiences? I'm thinking of like Richie's jetpack thing, Richie's plank thing with the jetpack bit. I'm thinking why I like that, apart from the sense of freedom. I think that like just the sound of the jetpack as you're going.
I could talk about sound forever. Do you guys have sound thoughts?
Definitely.
You do? Think out loud.
All right. Sound is one of the core reasons why I think our game was successful. Dirk spent so much time working on the spatial sounds to make sure that when a droid was firing over here, it would make the sound in that ear. So you can, in some ways, play the game without actually looking. That was what we're aiming at, so that you knew, oh, it's happening over there, I can shoot there. It's used as a part of the warning detection to warn players, like part of the movement mechanic I was talking about before, of physically walking around. We added some weird alarms, basically, every time there's a incoming fire from the side of the stage to tell you, watch out, just move. And that really worked. So adding spatial audio and tweaking it, making it as realistic as possible. Say realistic, make it hyper-realistic. So a lot of the time, you want a player to know, oh, it's just on this side of the world. It doesn't have to be from there, just something's happening over there. Encourage them to look with audio, it really helps. And then just have, beautiful audio design. It's easy.
I got even more specific. We actually had a microwave, and we put the audio source for the beep of the microwave just inside the microwave, but it wasn't where we thought the speaker would be, and it felt wrong. So we were in there, and the microwave would beep, and it'd be like, nope, this is fake. I want to cancel this microwave. This is unacceptable. And we had to move the audio source to exactly where we expected the sound, like out of the panel, basically, as opposed to in the middle of because nothing beeps out of the middle, but we could tell. And I don't know if did you guys do the Oculus, I think it was Oculus Home, or maybe it was one of the home experiences, might have been Steam Home. There's birds singing. Mm-hmm. It's Steam, it's the Steam Home. They're birds singing, but they're kind of ambient birds everywhere, and it's kind of the most distracting. It ends up being so important in a way that you wouldn't quite understand. So I would actually pinpoint exactly where you think the bird should be, and that is the audio source. It's so important to have that.
Well, I would say, you take sound for granted, but I mean, for us, one thing we realized too is when you're in this world. So, for instance, in our game, we had sharks that would attack you originally, and we actually did away with them and replaced them with sort of these drones that had sound, because it was really unnerving to kind of have a shark behind you and attack you, whereas with drones, you actually, even if you couldn't see it, you knew where it was relative to where you are and where in the world. And I think that just helped the players just with the overall experience.
Yeah, it reduces confusion, but also increases anticipation somehow.
Yeah.
How does that work?
I just wanted to add that you can't really do ambient sounds, especially not in 2D, because you can rotate your head and it's the immersion broken right away. But you can also not put it on one location in the world, because at some point, especially when you're navigating, you will notice where that sound comes from. And if it's a mix of ambiences together, like birds and the wind and a tree and whatever, it's going to sound really weird. So what we actually do now is we have a lot of ambient sources everywhere around you. So it's just a mix of ambience around you rather than one track mixed in. Yeah. And I also want to add that what really makes audio in VR awesome is VoIP in multiplayer, which is spatialized on the character. Because that's something you cannot experience in non-VR, right? That's just really awesome.
Heck yeah. Thank you.
Have you found any specific importance in use of color in VR compared to when you're developing for other sort of platforms?
Ooh.
That's a great question.
I really like this question.
I know. I wish I had a good answer for it.
Yeah, so technically wise, really dark and really bright is actually really hard based on the displays you're using for the VR headset. So just fading to black or just doing quick switches in colors is not pretty. It's ugly, but it can also make you sick because it's not what you expect on that specific headset. So those extremes are really hard, I think, in colors. Otherwise, the only thing we really think about is what does this do for colorblind people, and we try and keep making sure that everything stays clear for everyone. So we do use colors to pinpoint your attention to certain parts in the game, but we also make sure everyone can actually see it.
Yeah.
We haven't really even talked about accessibility.
Oh yeah, I mean, we could go.
If we're going to
That's a
talk
whole
about,
other
if we're going to talk
talk.
about the what is it, the
No one's going.
best practices,
Yeah.
accessibility is definitely
Huge.
like all of them. And so yeah, the only color requirement we have is that can everyone see the things, which is not just unique to VR. This is a accessibility across the board requirement. So yeah, in Space Pirate Trainer, it just changes it from green to red or to red to green, depending on, it's a simple thing, but it helps a small set of people. And that matters.
Yeah, that's super important.
So something we dealt with for a long time in mobile games was the speed of technology changing. So you were always trying to anticipate what the next wave of controls would be, so that you were future-proofing what you were working on for the next generation of items. We're still doing that, you know. Obviously, VR, we've got things like grip controllers, etc. coming. Do you do anything when you're working in that design space to try and predict what's going to happen, potentially future-proof your games, rather than making something where if you realize the trigger is going to disappear someday and it's all going to be about grabbing, do you kind of think about that as you're designing?
I don't think we had even time to think ahead necessarily. Like we were just focused on the present. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, well, some things you sort of know there's being worked on and that might come. Say we're talking about eye tracking or actually tracking your hands from your headset. Stuff like that is being worked on, so we can sort of expect that will come in the coming years. So it's not like we make stuff that works for that now, but it's more like we can't wait for that to be there. And that's with most of the headsets that come out. They're either they have a lot better lenses and better displays, so it will just look better, or they have higher resolution and I have to optimize my game better, right? Because you still want it to show on those headsets. Those don't change that much interaction-wise, I think. Controllers are super hard, especially because you'll always be designing for the lowest denominator, and people would just keep having those wide 5 ones. So when the index controllers come out, it's going to be really cool, but you still have all those players that can't use that. So just making a mechanic for that controller is something that's very low on our priority list because it's just a subset of people.
So do you think that it's something that maybe sits more on the side of the hardware developer to consider that, hey, these games exist, rather than on the design side of the game designer? Because there's definitely a marriage there, but do you think that's something that they should think about more than us as designers?
I think they should think about it. I think they do think about it as well. I know they talk with developers about what do we want in the next controllers. And I think you can also start noticing that a lot of the controllers are starting to look the same. They have the same buttons, so...
Thumbstick one.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything has a thumbstick. There's no trackpads. And
And they're not taking away buttons either, because then you can't play those old games anymore with the new controllers, right? But yeah, I do think there is a future, obviously, for hand tracking and having less controller-y things.
Yeah.
What that's going to look like, I really don't know yet.
Yeah, we're always thinking a little bit ahead. We have the benefit of a pretty successful game that's let the few of us just play. So we play with new designs of ideas that might work in 3 years' time. Like the Quest, there I go again, which just recently came out, did not exist. Like that concept didn't exist 2 years ago of tetherless VR. But if you just put a backpack and a laptop and walked around with your Vive, you had that, right? So you had that experience. So we sort of saw this coming, the Quest. I mean, eventually you're going to have inside-out tracking. And then when the mixed reality came out, or the Windows one in 2017, you basically could have a Quest with a laptop And it was totally acceptable to just walk around in a large space with a Windows Mixed Reality headset. And so we've always been imagining that VR will get easier and simpler and cheaper, and going 3 years in the future, you're just going to have really cheap style designs that you can just take anywhere.
Yeah.
And so VR in 3 years' time will be kind of like what it is now, but super easy to put on and won't matter where it's going. So I'm guessing you're going to see a crossover of more AR design, so more understanding of space, meshing, all that sort of stuff. So we're always thinking about what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And it's important in this industry.
It is. From a design standpoint, again, like, yeah, the hardware is always changing, but for us and for me and my design philosophies are always, how do you reduce abstractions as little as possible? Like, I don't want to use all the buttons on the controller. I want to ignore the controller as much as possible. I want humans to interact with the content in the most naturalistic way possible. And so whatever content that is that comes out, like, I'm hoping people are interacting with the world. So for me, it's mostly just grabbing, and the things that will happen is more nuanced way of like grabbing and touching and manipulating. And so in some ways I worry about, like, I think about the hardware, and I have a lot of opinions, especially about controllers, that the hardware developers will bring me in, and I have many, many opinions about how they should work and what I want from them. But in some ways, as long as I'm focusing on the human experience of interaction with the content, like, I can mostly translate that. And again, the other thing for me is that just as the medium grows, right, we start learning more things that work really well for VR as a medium. Like, I'll be integrating that. So thank you so much for listening to us talk about VR design principles. That's it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.